again, everybody. It is time once again for the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
Chip, we are back in our approach. We're coming in for a landing. We're approaching the airfield, and the airfield is called the college football season. It's just a few weeks ahead of us, so we are back to our weekly routine, and you and I will talk about the Big Ten West next week and the Big Ten East the week after that, and then the next show after that is going to be a game week show. So we're getting there.
We are. One of the things that's very exciting, at least to me, is on the Big Ten Network, they're starting to do their, I guess you would say, their campus visits, for lack of a better word, where, you know, for example, I happen to check out now. It's a little different than in previous years where, I mean, the entire episode was focused around one school. The first episode tonight was focused around they visited Nebraska and Illinois. So it wasn't a lengthy show. It was only a half hour, but even so, it was nice to kind of get a glimpse into how the other teams in the Big Ten are getting ready for the upcoming season.
Yeah, it's always good to see that, and it kind of reminds you a little bit about, you know, kind of where teams stand, because, you know, unless you're opening up your Phil Steele and you're just pouring through that, or your Lindy's or whatever other magazine you might have, it's entirely possible to completely forget what's going on at other schools.
I agree. And one of the things that I think is also interesting to remind our listeners is keep in mind Nebraska and Illinois, they were originally supposed to travel to Ireland for what was considered a week zero opening game, and just due to everything going on in the world, they decided, no, we're not going across the sea, but they're still kicking off on August 28th. So we have that to look forward to. We have Big Ten football coming in, I guess you could say, in about 2 weeks.
Big Ten-ish.
Yeah. Ish. Heavy on the ish.
Football-ish. I don't know. I'm not sure which of those. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's Big Ten-ish, football-ish. But, yeah, this is, I think, a vital year for Nebraska. If things don't start to get notably better there, they could start tearing it down and starting over again. We got Burt back, so it's going to be interesting to see what's going on there. I'm pretty excited. And, you know, like I said, we're just a few weeks away, so it's time to start cramming a little bit, because, you know, I lose track of stuff over the summer. There's stuff going on. You always you got life. It gets in the way of your stuff.
What was it? John Lennon said, "Life is what happens while you're busy making other plans." So
yeah.
You know, funny how that happens, but yeah, we'll definitely have to talk about. I know that you said we're going to be talking about the Big Ten West and the Big Ten East in upcoming shows, but we'll definitely have to make sure that we offer some thoughts as it goes into the week leading up to the Nebraska-Illinois start to the season on August 28th.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so I thought for this show, or actually you thought for this show, we should maybe start with our positional concerns for this year's Ohio State team. And I believe we're probably on the same page when we say that number one concern might have to be the cornerback position.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I think, you know, when I say, you know, positional concerns, you know, for some of them, as we go through these, some concerns are, I guess you could say, more of a concern than others.
Yeah.
But cornerback would definitely fall under that category. Let's face it, when you think about the performance of Ohio State's defense last year, especially in the secondary, cornerback position really took a hit, unfortunately, with the injury to Cameron Brown. Now, Ohio State is slowly but surely working Cameron Brown back into the fold at one of the corners. From what I understand, Seven Banks, as of today, kind of, you know, some slight nagging injuries, nothing too serious, but I think Ohio State's being precautionary. But it does lend itself to, okay, what if Seven Banks isn't ready to go? What if Cameron Brown isn't 100%? So that I would say that certainly qualifies as the number one concern going into the 2021 season for Ohio State positionally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Cam Brown, I don't know that you can count on him to be back to himself at any point in 2021. I mean, I think we all remember Tough Borland coming back from the same injury, right?
Oh, precisely. I mean, and it was to Cameron Brown's credit, I think, or maybe to Ohio State's credit. I'm not sure who I want to give credit to. If memory serves, Tough Borland's injury took place in the spring, and he was out there in the fall. So he wasn't. I mean, it was painfully and demonstrably visibly evident that Tough Borland was not 100%. With Cameron Brown, I think it was last year in the second game against Penn State where he went down. And you're right. I mean, it's a tough injury to come back from, especially, let's face it, at a position where you have to be extremely comfortable running up and down the field with wide receivers, sometimes as you're backpedaling. So, I mean, to make sure that you have that confidence that you're fully 100% healthy is something that I'm sure is going to be on his mind. And I'm sure that's what the Ohio State athletic training staff, as well as the coaching staff, is trying to ascertain during the fall camp before the season opener.
Yeah. If you're already down a guy that would be he would be probably an inked in starter if he wasn't coming off this injury. And I get that Ohio State's being precautionary, but I don't think it's ever good news to hear that Seven Banks is missing valuable practice time in the preseason after missing the spring. That's a little bit of a red flag, and it's not an ideal situation. So now you're looking at what is behind those two, who's going to be able to step up, and I think we believe Ryan Watts will be in that conversation, maybe Legend Cavazos. Who are you thinking may be in line to be in the lineup against Minnesota?
I think you hit it right on the head with the first one with Ryan Watts. That he is certainly, from everything that we've been able to learn, either from the various podcasts or from the insiders on Buckeye Scoop, that Ryan Watts is kind of taking a step forward in that secondary, that if he's not necessarily a starter in lieu of Cameron Brown, that he might be that third corner, that he's definitely one of these guys that the Ohio State coaching staff is looking forward to making making that step forward necessary to be considered a very dependable part of the secondary. Not to take anything away from Legend Cavazos, because he was highly recruited, highly regarded. He has also had his share of nagging injuries. I think that was one of the issues he had last year.
Yeah.
So there are other in terms of other names that that I would think could be in the running. I don't want to say that they are in the running, but could be in the running. Some of the younger guys that that we saw in the spring, besides Ryan Watts, I really liked. Now, granted, it was the spring game; you can't really put too much into it. But I really thought that Cam Martinez kind of had his moments in the spring game, that he could be somebody. I know that they signed a lot of very talented defensive backs, Jordan Hancock, Ja'Kalen Johnson, Andre Turrentine, that they're very high on. And here's a name that I guess you could say is kind of, we saw it in the spring game, but we're also starting to hear that he's actually making the switch from offense to defense, and starting to kind of possibly get himself in line for playing time. Mr. 6-year himself, Demario McCall.
Yeah. When's it going to be Demario McCall's time to shine, Chip?
Well, I agreed with something that I heard on one of the podcasts. Kirk Barton made a really, I think, astute point when he said that if Demario McCall had stayed at his previous position at running back or tried to be a wide receiver, then his chances to contribute, the chance to possibly extend his playing career beyond Ohio State would probably be very, very minimal, if it, probably non-existent. By making the switch, as he did in the spring and carrying it over into the fall and doing the little things in the fall camp that are kind of showing, hey, we can trust this guy on special teams or, in certain kind of situations, that I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm going to certainly defer to Kirk Barton, in his experience, but he said, this is the kind of thing where he might do enough that might allow him an opportunity to be in an NFL camp a year from now.
Yeah, so it's going to be a very interesting time as we approach the season to see what that starting defensive backfield looks like on the edges. I think, am I correct in ascertaining that corner is your number one concern, position
You
group
got
concern?
it.
Okay, so I was right about that. It's mine as well, and I think it's probably the bulk of it. I think maybe now we could take some turns with some of the other position groups, and I want to start with maybe one that might not be thought of right off the bat, and that's place kicker. I think place kicker is an area that I have some concerns about.
Okay, why don't you elaborate on that? Because I never thought about that. It's a very worthwhile one, but now that you mention it, I can certainly speculate as to why.
Yeah, the kicking wasn't really awesome before. It was okay, and it was approximating something that was passable from a top-notch team. But I don't think it was something that you always felt great about. Not like when Mike Nugent trotted on the field anytime after his freshman year when you just knew it was going through the uprights. You just didn't even worry about it. It didn't even matter how far they lined him back up. I mean, 56? No problem. Nugent's making this. But I don't think we've had that feeling in a few years. We certainly didn't have it in the spring game. And now we've got a new arrival from the transfer portal. And I don't know if it's because they've started to separate all of the duties of the kickers, and maybe the kickers aren't feeling comfortable or confident. But when you start saying, okay, you're the kickoff specialist, you're just going to concentrate on field goals. You're the onside kick guy. I mean, whatever it might be. I think now you're taking a guy who has always done all of it, and you're saying, okay, we're just going to have you just do one thing, and that's probably not great for them mentally, and that's a position that you need your guy to be strong mentally.
Great points all around. I think I would agree with you that Jake Seibert, and I feel bad if I'm mispronouncing the last name. I'm not sure if it's Seibert or Siebert. I genuinely don't know. So
I've always said Seibert, but I could have always been wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of these things where when I think about Blake Hobbiel, who finished up, I agree with you. I think, like that kind of level of confidence, when you think of the Nuge, like being able to come in and be, automatic, like, I mean, case in point, probably the most vivid memory I have of Mike Nugent, besides the national championship year, was him drilling, I think you said, like a 55-yarder in 2004 to beat Marshall. You know what I mean? Like that kind of clutch, okay, we need it now kind of a performance. We haven't seen that. So I think all of your concerns are warranted. And to the point that, all right, now you have specialists who focus on kicking the ball off, and let's try to make sure, boys, that we keep it in the field of play. We don't want it going out of bounds. That seems like that's been a bugaboo for a while. Not being able to drill it through the end zone. I mean, for the life of me, I never, ever understood Urban Meyer's fascination with trying to pin people in the corner when the possibility of it going out of bounds, it seemed like that reared its head more often than I chose to or care to remember. But getting back to the present day is, I think, Jake Seibert, and I think it's Noah Ruggles.
Yeah, Noah Ruggles comes in from North Carolina. He was Uh, 19 of 27 in 2019. That's not bad, but he was only 3 of 9 beyond 40 yards. So a little bit concerning.
Oh, I'd say that's very concerning.
I mean, he was automatic inside of 30. He was not, I think, 9 of 9, and I think 7 of 9 between 30 and 40, and then just 3 of 9 outside of 40. So, I mean, ideally, you're not having to kick 45, 40 plus yard field goals with this offense, but at some point against a good team, you will have to kick a clutch kick of that length. And so there's really no experience on the team that is, has shown to be adept at these long kicks.
And let's not ignore the fact that, and this is not meant to ridicule Noah Ruggles because we haven't seen him play. At least I haven't. I freely admit the past performance of Noah Ruggles at North Carolina, I cannot accurately state. I know that you just trotted out, in terms of what he did, but I can't accurately say that I've ever recall seeing him kick the ball. But what I was going to say is, let's not forget, you and I both know that when the calendar starts to turn from late October into November, that the weather in not only Ohio Stadium, but other areas around the Big Ten that Ohio State will have to visit, that the wind and the conditions can certainly wreak havoc. So, having that, like you said, it's comforting to know that Ohio State's offense sometimes isn't needing it, but there may be a time where you may need a kicker to come in when the game is on the line to drill a 40-plus yard field goal as time is winding down, or possibly to win the game.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you can rest easy about, Chip, I believe he is 48 of 48 in his career on extra points.
That's good to know. That, in terms of, like I said, I mean, I think, Jake Seibert, I don't want to say that it was because of the spring game. I think, this is a program that when Urban Meyer was here and Ryan Day has carried on, one of the mantras of this program has been that it's built upon competition, that the idea that nobody is guaranteed anything, that you have to be willing to work hard and truly compete for your position. And perhaps this was in the plans all along, to bring in an additional kicker to challenge for that place kicking job. That being said, Jake Seibert's performance in the spring game was concerning. So I can certainly understand why you listed that as a concern.
Yeah. I will point out that Mike Nugent did have a freshman year. It didn't go great. So maybe this is all much ado about nothing. Maybe Jake Seibert will be just fine.
Maybe you're right, because memory does serve that Mike Nugent was not necessarily, I wouldn't call him a fan favorite in 2001. He was certainly, he came into that. He earned that. He earned that level of admiration and affection and trust from the players and coaches, and then the fans. But yeah, 2001 was very rocky for Mike Nugent. Let's hope that Jake Seibert rebounds from a shaky spring game and surpasses all of our expectations going into 2021.
Yeah, it's actually funny that Mike Nugent did such a great job over his last couple of years at Ohio State that it's basically like almost everybody has blanked his first year out of their minds, and you don't really hear anything about it. There's so much love for him as a kicker at Ohio State. He's the first name that anybody really utters when they talk about the great kickers at Ohio State, and that's funny because his career didn't start out that way. So we'll hope that that Seibert will turn it around, or maybe Ruggles comes in and maybe they have a good competition and somebody wins the thing. But I think if you can kick, you can kick. I don't think you need to you don't need to protect your field goal kicker by having someone else kicking off. And if your place kicker can't kick off, then you already have some mental concerns about him anyway.
Very good points all around. Yeah, like I said, I'm used to I ever since the rule change of, with the opposing team being eligible to fair catch, I for the life of me, I would just boom it. Like not even, I wouldn't even make it something where the possibility of a return, I would just kind of chalk that up to, okay, it's one less collision that you need to have any of your players have on special teams. Just boom it through the end zone and let's begin on defense. But I think you raised really good points all around.
All right, Chip, what is your next area of concern positionally for Ohio State this year?
Okay, so we've talked about the corner. We talked about place kicker. I'm going to go with one that concern is just it's rooted in the fact that they're inexperienced, and that's at the linebacker position.
Okay.
The fact at linebacker that it's not a question of talent. I think that when you think about some of the names on the roster that Ohio State has accumulated, that it's not a question of their abilities. It's the fact that they're inexperienced. And when you think back to the last few years, when you had players, the aforementioned Tough Borland, we had Pete Werner, we had Baron Browning, Justin Hilliard came on. The fact that all of those players played significant minutes and the coaching staff did not substitute the players who are now going to be expected to take those starting roles as much as you or I may have expected. That kind of, like I said, the inexperience factor is what weighs on me the most. Now, I will say that I'm expecting at the outside, at the I guess you would say at one of the outside positions, that Taraja Mitchell sounds. I just mentioned how this is a program built on competition. It sounds like Taraja Mitchell sounds, based on what I've heard on podcasts, what I've read on the Scoop, that Taraja Mitchell sounds like he is running with the ones pretty consistently at the middle linebacker spot. And this kind of goes back into that level of just uncertainty because not a lot of experience there. The previous thought was that Dallas Gant was going to take over at that middle linebacker spot, had a foot injury that sidelined him throughout the spring. So Dallas Gant didn't play. So we started to see and hear about other players like Tommy Eichenberg. Now I'm going to butcher this poor young man's name. It's never intentional. If word ever gets out, it's not. I believe it's, Pele Niatiote. I think I'm trying to based on what I've heard others. So if he came in from the transfer portal via USC, is not yet officially on the roster, or is not officially on the roster due to like a snafu with the NCAA transfer rules. I mean, it's just, so he may be a candidate, but the name that has me intrigued is that we're reading about on Buckeye Scoop, that's really starting to make a move is Cody Simon at middle linebacker. So I think, between if it does wind up with Cody Simon and Taraja Mitchell on the outside, and then when you factor in the fact that you have the bullet, that hybrid where it could be somebody like Craig Young, it's not a question of talent. It's just a level of experience. That's why I rank it as a position of concern.
Yeah, I think you're right to be concerned there. As you mentioned, no experience really. It's unfortunate that Dallas Gant had some issues in the spring because he's a guy who at least has flashed late in games when the backups have been in, has made some plays. So he's a kind of almost a known quantity, a guy that you almost you get a sense of he could probably step in and do that job because he seemed to do okay when he came in off the bench. But yeah, you're right. There's not a lot of experience there, and we even have the possibility of seeing Steel Chambers in the mix there after he has changed positions. And And we've heard, some good things about Tommy Eichenberg. We've heard some good things about Craig Young and his ability to do, to be flexible and do multiple things. And I'm excited about that. I don't know if the NCAA is going to clear the USC transfer, who I won't even try to approximate what you said for his name.
Okay, come on now.
I'm not even going to try to go there because I think you probably got it pretty close, and I don't want to look bad by comparison. So I'm not going to ever count on the NCAA to do the right thing because we've seen too many examples of them not doing the right thing. So it is a position of concern, and I think, and I might be wrong, but there's a chance that Cody Simon could be the best Simon at Ohio State since John Simon.
That's taking I was going to say going out on a limb. Here's another name that I'm just kind of curious as to what role the coaching staff has, simply because we were just talking about the bullet, and the fact that Craig Young is kind of that hybrid linebacker safety.
Mm-hmm.
Is if Ohio State's playing against, let's just say, a traditional running team, I'm kind of curious about Kayvon Pope, because he's another guy who highly touted, highly ranked recruit, has been stuck, kind of again, in that logjam, if you will, of all these players at the position. And from everything that I understand about, it's not that he's not talented. It's just that his skill set is more for that traditional linebacker role, like in that, that he would do better against like a run oriented defensive scheme. So I'm just wondering what his role might possibly be in 2021.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see because he is a guy who's gotten on the field at times. Linebacker is definitely an area of concern, as you mentioned, and I think we're getting to the point where we're not going to have too many more positions left that we have some concerns. But is there anything else you wanted to touch on with the linebackers before we move on?
No, I mean, I just think it's going to be interesting to see, I guess, before we move on, is if the coaching staff, if they are going to have the same kind of level of playing time that they had for their previous linebackers, meaning like, are they going to keep, whoever in, like repeatedly, or are they going to rotate the linebackers since they're all relatively inexperienced, try and get as many of them some necessary game reps as possible.
Mm-hmm. All right, let us move on to my next area, and it's a little bit like what you were saying. Tons of talent, not much experience. And I think it's easy to overlook this because Ryan Day is the head coach of this team. But there's got to be some concern at quarterback since no one on the team has thrown a pass. So I have a little concern there because we don't know what we're going to see. And it really kind of comes down to who takes those first snaps and how do they do right out of the gate. Because the one thing that this team doesn't want or doesn't need is for whoever gets that start, we think it'll be C.J. Stroud, to go on against Minnesota and throw 2 or 3 interceptions in the first half. Because now you do have a quarterback controversy. Even if Ryan Day says, he's my guy, I've picked him, he's the starter next week and moving forward, you're already going to hear rumblings. And those rumblings aren't just going to be from the fan base. They're going to be people on the team that have always secretly supported Jack Miller or Kyle McCord or whatever and think that should be the guy. And those divisions will start to deepen if it's a bad performance in the first game.
Very good points. I would certainly rank quarterback as being worthy of a positional concern for all the reasons you laid out. I can't argue against the fact that Ohio State, as of September 2nd, they're going up against a team, granted, not the most talented team in the Big Ten, but a team that returns a lot of their defensive starters from a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going in there with a completely inexperienced quarterback. The very first pass that, I don't care who it is, that they complete will be the very first pass of their NCAA career. So that's certainly worthy of concern. One of the things, maybe you have a different opinion on this, and that's okay, but I've often heard of, especially at the NFL level, a lot of people kind of using the term game manager in a derogatory sense, like, okay, like that they, just basically, it's like they know how to function within the offense, but they can't carry the team, and that kind of a thing. In my estimation, especially in game 1 at Minnesota and even at home against Oregon, I think Ryan Day would be doing a disservice to whoever the quarterback is if he does not try to really emphasize to, I don't care if it's CJ Stroud, Kyle McCord, Jack Miller, whoever is chosen, hey, all we need you to do is, make sure that you get us, into the right play, just play within the confines of the offense. So that means, like, okay, like if it means, check downs to the running back, like if you don't see the wide receiver open, that's like making this the smart and safe play. You might want to say it's kind of trestle ball ish, but I'm of the opinion that until these guys get a little more experience and a little bit more confidence playing in front of either the games on the road or even at home, I think it's a necessity to try to emphasize being kind of a game manager.
Yeah, I don't hate the idea, especially early in the season. There's a couple of things that, are built in to this first game that you don't often see, and that is, one, none of your quarterbacks have thrown a pass. Number two, Ohio State doesn't normally go on the road in conference in week 1. And, when Ohio State does go on the road in week 1, it's usually against somebody that's not all that great. So, like in years past, I think it's been Indiana when they weren't like where they are now. So it's tough, and you're going to be on the road in the Big Ten, which is always a new thing. First start, first pass, as you mentioned. And there's a couple ways you can go with this. You can go with the game management route and say we're just going to run the ball. We're going to be conservative. We might have to punt the ball 10 times in the game, but we're going to grind it out, and we're going to get out of there with our win. And the other thing you could do is say, you know what? They're thinking we're going to do that. Let's go play action on play 1 and just go for all of it. And if it's not there, overthrow the guy by 20 yards. And then we'll play from there. But there's a couple ways you can go there, and I think that we've seen enough from Ryan Day to know that he's not afraid to try things, and he's not afraid to do what's not expected. I mean, we go back to some trick plays early in games when things aren't working. Things are off to a rocky start, but I think that either of those things could happen. I think he's got trust in his quarterbacks. I think he's got trust in his system. Certainly he should have trust in his receivers. So there's a possibility that they will go conservative, but you got to think Minnesota's going to expect that.
Certainly. I think Minnesota's going to do what they can to try to confuse whoever the quarterback is. I mean, in terms of, possibly showing blitz and dropping out of it, in terms of, like you said, it wouldn't be necessarily the worst thing in the world to do to go play action on the first play or so, to kind of show them we're not afraid to go deep. As you accurately stated, the wide receivers that are available for whoever the quarterback is are certainly there to, help. I think certainly a player who could be, I don't want to call him an X factor, because I think he's certainly going to be a vital part of the offense, regardless of who the opponent is. Jeremy Ruckert, that's a mismatch for any Big Ten opposing defense. I mean, it's easier said than done to say that you're going to cover Jeremy Ruckert successfully all game. And I think that's a tremendous asset for any of the quarterbacks to take advantage of. So I just think, when I say like game management, I think it's the kind of thing where, even Ryan Day in comments that he was making is that none of the quarterbacks, or maybe it's just coach talk to keep the quarterbacks on their toes and keep the fans and the press interested. Ryan Day basically said, that he's looking for somebody to kind of start to distinguish themselves. It's entirely possible a week from now that we may know and the fans may know that whoever's going to be designated as the starter going into the Minnesota game, with the week of practice. And then I think on this coming Saturday, which would be August 14th, that there's a scrimmage, that might be, what they need to, okay, this is the guy, and let's get this guy ready for September 2nd. So I think all those things are in play. I'm certainly of the opinion that I completely agree with you that the last thing in the world we want to see on September 2nd is whoever the quarterback is to go out there and, turn the ball over, throwing interceptions, getting flustered, because like you said, now all you've done is if there wasn't already a suspected quarterback controversy, now you've created one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be something that the coaches are going to have to manage it. I'm not worried about the fact that they'll have a plan. I know it'll be a plan that, that they have worked very carefully on with the quarterbacks, with each other. But, when the ball's kicked off, everything's different, when what was the line that Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth?
Yep, you got it.
So we'll have to see how these guys do. And Minnesota's going to be coming after whoever the quarterback is and try to, make them think about, they might take a few extra little late shots early in the game. I think it'd be great if Ryan Day came out with just a 0 F's given attitude and said, you know what, for about the first 2 series, I don't even care if it's successful. We're going to go 4 verts and just bring, we'll bring Jeremy Ruckert across, in a drag underneath him, and we'll see what happens for about 8 plays in a row. And if it doesn't work, then maybe we'll get the running game going. But it'll be interesting to see how he approaches that first game.
I completely agree.
Yeah. All right, Chip. So I've got quarterbacks. Do you have another group that you are a little concerned about positionally?
Yeah. We touched on it earlier, kind of in tandem with, like the biggest concern being at corner. And it's just more of the fact that they didn't necessarily distinguish themselves last year, and that's the safety position. In the sense that Josh Proctor, when the opportunity to make a highlight hit, like a highlight film of a hit that would make the late great Jack Tatum proud. I mean, he certainly rises to the occasion.
Yeah,
that's not the issue. It's more on the coverage side of things. I think that even the coaching staff would probably prefer for more consistency at the coverage side of the safeties. From what I have read and heard on Buckeye Scoop, that Lathan Ransom is starting to kind of emerge as a viable option at the other safety, kind of like that cover, like that other corner / safety, like the way that they distinguish it. Mm-hmm. But Lathan Ransom is, like he kind of has earned the trust of the coaching staff. We already know that Marcus Hooker is back. Now, granted, I'm not sure that Marcus Hooker is necessarily in the running for starter, but the fact that he has game experience, I think that, that bodes well. And, another name that kind of we mentioned earlier as it related to that bullet position, Craig Young more on the linebacker side of the bullet position, but Ronnie Hickman at safety is another thing, like kind of that bullet option, like in more obvious passing down. So I wouldn't say the reason why I mentioned it now is because it's not nearly as much of a concern as the other position groups we talked about, but mm-hmm. I would say that safety kind of ranks up there in terms of I'm kind of anxious to see what they do.
So one of the safeties made me tell Gerd online that I hate him. and that is because Gerd was out there taking pictures of the guys on check-in day, and he took a picture of Court Williams and said, "Court is in session." And then I responded with, "I hate you."
And understandably so. Understandably
Yeah.
so.
Where do you see Court Williams in the grand scheme of things?
I think, something, he's kind of that mystery because I think he was designated as a bullet. I'm just not sure if he's more of a safety or more of a linebacker. I want to say that he's more of a safety, but he's one of those guys that, we talked earlier about the importance of coming back strong from injury. I mean, he missed all of last year.
Mm-hmm.
So we've never really seen. I know that the coaches rave about Court Williams. I mean, say what you, I mean. I think
they called him a future. I think they called him a future captain when he was a freshman.
I mean, how nobody works harder. The coaches just, their admiration of Court Williams is abundant. So yeah, I'm anxious to see how Court Williams fits into the scheme of the defense when we kick off on September 2nd.
All right, so I just want to point out that our areas of concern include 3 different positions on the defense.
You notice we didn't talk about the defensive line.
We have not. Do you have positional concerns about the defensive line? Okay.
No. And again, I think in terms of ranking them, the way that, I would agree with, I want to give credit where credit is due. The fact that, you and I both were in agreement at corner. I would certainly say that that place kicker, after all the valid points that you raised, certainly would be a legitimate, number 2. And then I would say that linebacker, due to the fact that of the inexperience, it's not the talent, it's just the inexperience. So,
right.
The fact that I put safety on my list was based on the fact that the entire defense last year, and I'm willing to give Kerry Combs a break in the sense that he didn't have spring practice. I mean, you can say, oh, all this talent was there. The reality is, he came in, never really got a chance to kind of implement the scheme that he probably would have felt comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
I really do think that the defense is going to take a step up. I really do. I think a name that we haven't heard a lot about so far in fall camp, but as a defensive analyst that I think is going to be of immense help, is Paul Rhodes. He was a long time defensive coach, that, I think, being, just that sounding board for Kerry Combs as well as the other coaches on the defensive staff. I think that's going to make a big difference. But yeah, I think most Ohio State fans, maybe you disagree, I think most Ohio State fans would say that if they had position group concerns, it would probably lean more on the defensive side of the ball.
Sure. And, some of those responsibilities coaching-wise have been divvied up a little bit differently to try to help Kerry Combs this year as well. So we'll have to wait and see how that sort of fixes or fails to fix things. But I feel a lot better about it this year. And, despite the concerns, there's certainly a lot of talent there. I don't think they'll take a step backward. I think, if anything, they'll take a step forward, or maybe even only a slight one. But I think they'll definitely take a step in the right direction this year. One thing we do want to mention that was not the case when we last spoke was that Tyler Friday has been ruled out for likely most of the season, which is not going to help the depth, but the defensive end position might be the one spot that you could actually take a hit.
Yeah, I feel bad for Tyler Friday because he's one of those guys that, he's had, nagging injuries off and on throughout his career, going into his senior year. He certainly seems like a likely candidate to redshirt this coming year. So Ohio State will probably get the benefit of his services for another year. But yeah, you're right that the defensive end position is very, very talented, well stocked. And I think, if anything, this is one of those things where, not that you want you don't want your team to have the injury bug by any stretch, but if there was a position group that could probably sustain it, it probably was the defensive end position.
Yeah, it will be more playing time for the young guys, which is not necessarily bad considering how highly touted those recruits are. So, maybe more snaps for Sawyer, maybe more snaps for. Have we been saying his name wrong, Chip? Is it Tui Mawau?
I'm gonna let you have that one since you let me out on the ledge. I'm gonna just continue to refer to him as JTT.
Okay, because I know the guys on Buckeye Weekly have changed their pronunciation of his name.
Yeah, it's one of these things where until I want to say, isn't it like right before the season? And this is not meant, to slam the sports information, but like where they actually send out some kind of a pronunciation guide,
Yeah, it will be in the it'll be in the media guide.
So that's when we are able to kind of get a glimpse at that. It's just one of these things where it's like, yeah, just calling him JTT is, for the time being, I think is sufficient.
Yeah, I think so. All right, so let's just talk about the positions that we did not mention as concerns. We already talked about defensive line. We don't have concerns there. I think it's fair to say neither of us have concerns in the wide receiver room. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. That would be. I mean, you're okay. Now you're truly fine. You're trying to find flaws on just for the sake of finding them. if you're complaining about the wide receivers.
I'm pretty sure we both feel pretty good about the offensive line.
I do. I guess that teaser for Buckeye Scoop, if you're not an insider, but some of the things that we're starting to hear about without giving it away is that there's a lot of mixing and matching to try and get, quote unquote, the best five on the offensive line, that they feel pretty confident as to certain positions more than others. But yeah, I think the offensive line is going to definitely be, when we talked earlier about the quarterback, like that's going to be one of those things that whoever the quarterback is going to be able to rely upon solid, consistent protection from the offensive line.
Yeah, two of the best tackles in the country returning, so I think we feel pretty good there, even though, Chip, Ryan Jacoby in the transfer portal.
Well, I wish him well. That was late-breaking news as of today, as we record this. Ryan Jacoby, was, part of the recruiting class that came in 2019 and didn't see game action in either 2019 or 2020. As we were talking about some of the different, I guess you could say, like the different position groups, the offensive line being a strength is that they're moving players around. It might be one of these things where maybe the coaching staff, in terms of where he is currently projected to be on the depth chart, and with the number of offensive linemen who are coming in, that, either like as current freshmen or like projected to come in next year, that he's thinking, all right, I don't see a path forward to meaningful playing time, and I'm going to, enter the transfer portal and take my talents elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, look at we think that the five that we think we're going to see starting, he's not in that group. We don't think he's necessarily in that next five group, and he's a third-year guy. So, it's been a handful of practices already, so he's probably got a pretty good idea where he is in the pecking order. He knows what's coming up behind him, and some of the guys that are ahead of him are behind him in terms of experience. So, it's really a no-brainer. If you want to get playing time and you don't think you're going to get any, that's what you do nowadays. You just stick your name in that portal and find somewhere else to go.
And I wish him well. You certainly, I think when you would certainly hope that every young man who signs with Ohio State sticks it out and wants to wants to graduate with their degree from Ohio State. But on the other hand, I'm sure Ryan Jacoby has aspirations of making it to the NFL, like probably just about every other player who signs with Ohio State does. And if you don't see a path forward to playing time, you kind of owe it to yourself. All right, maybe I can find a program, because from what I understand, Ryan Jacoby, it wasn't as though Ohio State was the only major offer. Like, I think, he could have gone to, we talked about earlier, like he could have gone to Oregon. I think that was one of his offers. He could have gone to Boston College, which wouldn't be a surprise now that, you've got, some Ohio State coaching connections up there. Like, I'm not saying that that's where he's going. I have no idea where he's going, but my point being that, I think, Ryan Jacoby is doing what he thinks is in his best interest going forward for his playing career.
Well, Chip, if you want to wish well to a turncoat like Ryan Jacoby, who's turning his back on Ohio State and refusing to just be a backup for the Buckeyes, then that's fine. If that's what you want to do, Chip.
I feel comfortable.
All right. Yeah, what sucks is that he's an Ohio kid, and you never want to see those guys, going somewhere else. But if he doesn't have a path forward, he doesn't have a path forward. It's not like you don't wish him well, and we do. He was a 4-star, and I believe Ohio's 8th ranked player for 247 Sports. So, yeah, he had some other offers. He's got places he can go. So why not go and try to make your mark somewhere else? Everybody dreams about being in the NFL. Very unlikely you're going to be in the NFL if you don't get any snaps in college. So good luck to young Mr. Jacoby. But no issues with the offensive line. I think we're feeling pretty good there. We're feeling, as mentioned, feeling pretty good about the wide receiver room, and that just leaves really the tight ends. I think we feel pretty good there, even though there was some losses there. You got Ruckert, and you've got some guys sliding in over there as well that have been doing well. And I think there's probably no concerns at tight end or in the running backs room.
Not at all. If anything, Jeremy Ruckert, I think, is primed for what he believes is going to be a sensational year, as in his final year of eligibility. The reports coming out about Cade Stover, who made the transition over from linebacker to tight end, have been exceptional this fall camp, that he's really kind of emerged as that number 2 tight end. So I agree with you that tight end is certainly not a position of concern. And at running back, I mean, you mentioned accurately that Steel Chambers has made the move to linebacker. That is indicative of just the quality and depth of that running back group. Mayan Williams right now is running with the ones. By no means does that mean that Mayan Williams is going to be the starter all year long. I think Master Teague is certainly going to continue to be a force to be reckoned with. And you can't help but wonder in terms of the talent. Treyvion Henderson, is he going to do something, if not necessarily in game one, but one of the early games, that's going to just leave the fans wondering, why don't they play this guy more? Because all the superlatives that we're reading and hearing about with Treyvion Henderson. And let's not forget about Marcus Crowley.
Exactly.
Evan Pryor. That's what I'm saying. It's like running back is certainly not anything that I'm overly concerned with. I think it's going to be trying to keep everyone happy. I think it's going to be a running back by committee as approach. And fortunately, with some of those early season games, I think the opportunity for as much playing time for everybody is certainly going to be something on the coaches' minds.
Well, and I think too, if you are looking at this, whichever freshman quarterback ends up getting the first snaps, if you're looking at them being a game manager, then you're going to be looking at a lot of running plays. If you're looking at a lot of running plays, you want to keep these guys fresh. Ohio State can rotate 4 or 5 running backs and keep everybody fresh. You mentioned Master Teague, not just a pretty good Teague, but a Master Teague, Chip. And you've got Mayan Williams, who was one of those guys who every time he touched the ball looked every bit the part. And to the point where if you ask most people how many carries he had or how many yards he had, they're going to way overestimate it. Then Marcus Crowley, everybody kind of forgets the flashes that he was having the year before last, and Treyvion Henderson. I mean, what can you say about his talent? It's an embarrassment of riches is the phrase that comes to mind, and I think that Ohio State will be just fine in that department. Getting back to the tight end position, we've heard good things about Cade Stover. We obviously know what we've got with Jeremy Ruckert. I'm interested in seeing G. Scott Jr.
Yeah, that move happened in the spring, and you're talking about, I guess, he's probably listed around 225.
Yeah.
That again, he's going to be more of, that receiving tight end. Not to say that he can't block or that he won't block, but I mean, I from everything that I understand, like Cade Stover is definitely, ready, willing, and able to block. And, like that is something that Ohio State fans have grown accustomed to at the tight end position. But the fact that, you have somebody as versatile as Jeremy Ruckert, and, somebody who's, learning the position in Cade Stover, but yeah, you still have the receiving threat in somebody like G. Scott. And, let's not forget, they have, Joe Royer, who, he'll be a redshirt freshman, and true freshman Sam Hart. So yeah, I think tight end is in very capable hands.
Yeah. All right. Do you have concerns at punter?
No, I think Jesse Mirko is it's a done deal.
He's Australian. That's all you need.
He's Australian. That's all you need. My only concern is if we get to, have to endure a whole season of Tom Orr's Australian accent talking about Jesse Mirko. That's my concern. Mm-hmm. So that would pretty much summarize that.
What about holder or long snapper? Any concerns there?
No, nothing there. Unfortunately, you and I both know that those kind of manifest itself usually at the most inopportune time, in terms of, like an errant snap or a bad hold, when you are least expecting it. So, I haven't seen or heard anything that has led me to believe that those are positions of concern.
All right. Well, I think that pretty much covers it. If you want to know who's going to start, I suggest you become an insider over at BuckeyeScoop.com, because we're all going to probably find out within hours of the coaching staff informing the players of what's going on.
Oh, certainly. If not before.
Yeah. We might know if C.J. Stroud is the quarterback before C.J. Stroud.
Entirely possible.
Yeah.
I wouldn't rule it out.
I think that was a good topic. I had a lot of fun breaking that down with you, Chip. I think that was good.
Well, thank you.
Let us talk about some black stripes. Actually, only one. Denzel Burke has lost his black stripe, Chip, but you don't have to help him find it. It's one of those things that you want to lose.
It is. It's one of these things where when we talk about the different traditions that Ohio State football has over the years, I will say that I do think this is, a credit to Urban Meyer for instituting this. I just think this kind of an approach of the black stripe being removed when the player has demonstrated to the coaching staff and to the other to, I guess, like his designated big brother within the program, that all right, this guy is ready to be called upon when and if needed in a game situation. It is. I think it's certainly something that I think the fans have really kind of gravitated around. Like, I know we're talking about Denzel Burke right now, but in previous years, like who's the next one who might be getting their black stripe off? We talked earlier about, players like Treyvion Henderson, like he was one of these guys who had his black stripe removed in the spring. Same thing with Jack Sawyer. So it's like when you get that, it's like, okay, good. Like the coaches are ready to put them in a game, or are not going to be hesitant to put them in a game if the situation extends itself. So now we talked. Hey, let's face it. We talked earlier about the biggest position of concern being corner. There's Denzel Burke. He's a guy that that is potentially one of those guys who I'm not sure where he is on the depth chart, but he could be a player that we would be seeing sooner rather than later in game situations.
Yeah, I mean, the fun thing about the black stripe removal is that typically it's guys that you expect, they're going to be ahead of other guys. They're just coming in and they just get it. And I think that's borne out somewhat in talent, but sometimes it's also work ethic combined with that talent. And when you take a look at this class and who has lost their stripes, and you go back to the first day that anyone from this class lost their black stripes, the first two right off the board were Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jack Sawyer, two guys that we figure we're going to see quite a bit this year.
Well, let's face it. I mean, not to take anything away from Jack Sawyer, because, I think, you're talking about a guy who was one of the top players in the country. I think big things were expected of him, and he certainly, his performance in the spring game, warranted, all of the enthusiasm that Ohio State fans had for him. Just speaking on behalf of myself, Marvin Harrison Jr.'s performance in the spring game really, I mean, the fact that, that black stripe was removed, but then the performance in the spring game that Marvin Harrison Jr. gave, all of a sudden you're like, wow, now I see why everyone's talking about this kid. Because in this class, now granted, Emeka Egbuka he's had his black stripe removed, so that's not meant to say that, like Harrison's ahead of him or anything like that. But
he's a week ahead of him, Chip. He's one full week.
A whole week. I wonder if Emeka can catch up. But in seriousness, I think the fact that Marvin Harrison Jr. is one of these guys that, to kind of give another plug to the insiders board on Buckeye Scoop, that people are kind of like, man, the recruiting analysts, they did not rate him highly enough. Like that they kind of maybe brought him down in comparison, thinking like, oh, okay, well, he's playing with Kyle McCord, which is why he looks so good. But the things that you read about in terms of the strides he's made in the weight room and just his work ethic and his route running, which again, when you grow up with a Hall of Fame wide receiver father, I think it's going to be exciting to see when Marvin Harrison Jr. gets an opportunity to play in 2021.
Chip, I was sold on Marvin Harrison Jr. when he was named Marvin Harrison Jr.
I wasn't saying that I wasn't sold. I am merely saying that based on our astute recruiting analysts that we have available to us on the insiders board, I'm merely paraphrasing some of their observations, if you will, that, hey, I thought this kid was going to come in and it might take a little bit longer, and sure enough, like, no, that is not the case. Like, he's ready to go.
Yeah, I thought as soon as he committed, I was telling people I would not be surprised if he ends up being the gem of this class, because it's not a given that if you have a Hall of Fame father, you are an excellent football player. I mean, we have seen. Well, I mean, I know.
Ron Carter, I know.
I wasn't going to bring it up. I was just going to say certain people's sons, but I will say this: the kind of wide receiver that Marvin Harrison would lend itself to his son being at that level, because he did learn those little things that Marvin did well. Marvin was never the fastest guy. He was certainly never the biggest guy. He knew how to get open, and he did that two different ways. One, excellent footwork and route running, and the other was knowing what the defense was doing and what to do to counteract that. So if you have that coming in because you've grown up with that and you've been taught that, your whole life, I mean, you're going to be ahead of most people anyway. So I kind of expected Marvin Harrison Jr. to maybe come in and have a really strong career, and it looks like he's on track to do that. Of course, it's too early to say, but he was among the first two to get their black stripe off on April 6th. Then Treyvion Henderson did a few days later. Then Emeka Egbuka and Reed Carrico, and now Denzel Burke. So I don't know who's going to be next. Chip, do you?
I couldn't even begin to venture a guess. I think, a lot of those players that you rattled off, they were here in the spring. So they had that advantage of, being here, taking part of winter workouts, being a part of spring ball. Who's to say? I mean, on Buckeye Scoop, we're reading about different players emerging all the time. So I don't want to, necessarily identify one or another, just because I think, the positive reports that we're hearing about this freshman class, I think it's entirely possible that in the next day or so, we might get that answer that you're asking.
Yeah, I think so. So that's it's cool. Congrats to Denzel Burke, and maybe we'll see him this fall in getting some playing time as a result of showing the coaches that he's a true Buckeye and getting that black stripe removed. Chip, let's look a little bit before we get out of here at some Buckeyes in the NFL. Unfortunately, I'm sad to say that Raekwon McMillan has torn his ACL and will miss the season. This is the second time he's done that. He did that before his rookie season with Miami. He's now with New England, and I guess the only there's no positive here at all, but I don't like the Patriots. So I don't
there's
have
your
to
I guess there's your positive.
I don't have to see Raekwon McMillan making plays against the Dolphins this year. But this is not the way I would have wanted that to happen.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate news. From what I seem to recall, maybe on like a tweet on social media, that McMillan was actually playing well in New England, that they were very pleased, with just his football acumen and the performance he was giving. So it's very unfortunate. I wish him nothing but the best in terms of his recovery. The fact, I'm not sure what the length of his contract was with New England. You can only hope it was for a few years, so that way he can come back strong and, much to your dismay, play well for the Patriots in future seasons.
Well, maybe not that well. At least not against Miami. Anyway.
Against Miami. He can play well except against Miami.
As we all know, Chip, the Detroit Lions have a fabulous history in the NFL in recent years. I think no one would argue with that, right?
Maybe the people of Detroit or anyone with a discerning eye for wins and losses, but yeah.
All right. Well, the Lions have decided not to keep Jake Hausman on their roster. They have waived him. The former Ohio State tight end was, though, picked up by the New York Giants, who I guess might have at one point or another done okay at the tight end position.
They might have. Jake Hausman was one of those guys that, he didn't get a lot of playing time at Ohio State, but I think it's a credit to the coaching and the style of play that Ohio State has, that, even for somebody with minimal playing time, minimal receptions, was attractive enough to NFL teams to be extended a free agent contract. And the fact that, like you said, Detroit cut him, and it's still relatively early in the training camp period for the NFL, for the New York Giants to claim him on waivers, that it's not beyond the realm of possibility that maybe he can stick around with New York, if not necessarily on their active roster, maybe on their practice squad.
Yeah, a lot of times what you see when that happens is that a player will get cut, and the team that picked him up was a team that maybe were waiting to maybe pick him with their next pick, And they're like, okay, he wasn't there, but now he's there. Now we actually get to bring him in and take that look at him. I think he's a guy he's one of those guys that could end up having a long career but play for like 10 teams, because he's not going to be your pass catching tight end. He's going to be a blocking tight end, and he's just going to go out and play good, solid, hard-nosed, fundamental football. He's going to get you, he'll catch the ball if you throw it to him, but probably not going to be your number 1 or 2 or 3 target.
No, but like you said, I think, the fact that it happened, kind of, like you said, when it did, and like you said, the way that the NFL works in terms of, all right, well, I really wanted to get this guy. The fact that that they claimed him on waivers, I think it bodes well for possibilities for Jake Hausman's future.
Yeah. So good luck to him catching on with the G-men. The last thing I have is that the Steelers have signed former Buckeye lineman Malcolm Pridgen. He has been, I think, kicked around some practice squads with Houston and Cleveland. The last we heard of him in the news, he had opted out of the 2020 season, lost his mother to COVID-19. So completely understandable. And now he will get a chance to show what he can do with the Steelers. The Steelers have done okay with former Ohio State players.
They have. And again, in a similar vein to Jake Hausman, the fact that it's early in training camp, I, for the life of me, don't know if the Steelers have had a rash of injuries on the offensive line. I know that offensive line was a concern for Pittsburgh, going into this season. Perhaps they look at Malcolm Pridgen. Like you said, he spent time on Houston and Cleveland's rosters, that maybe, again, he might help shore up depth at, along the offensive line. So I wish him nothing but the best, except against Cleveland.
Yeah. Doesn't strike me as the guy who will be starting for the Steelers.
Probably not.
But good luck to Malcolm, because, I mean, the longer you can stay, hang around an NFL team, collect a paycheck, the better. So, especially if you're one of those fringe guys. So, that's all I have. Chip, did you have anything else you want to talk about before we get out of here?
No, I'm anxious to talk next week about the Big Ten West, kind of give our thoughts and opinions on how we believe the 2021 Big Ten West will shake out. And I guess just keep your eyes and ears open for more news from Buckeye Scoop, regardless of whether it's, articles or podcasts, that there's always news coming out, and Buckeye Scoop's certainly the place where you want to go to find that information.
Yeah, that sounds good. All that sounds good. I am looking forward to this. I don't know if I want to do predictions again this year after the embarrassment of last year, Chip. We'll have to play that by ear.
That's fine. That's completely fine.
Last year was a weird year, though, so who knows? But yeah, we'll have to dig into the western half of the Big Ten this week and see what we can come up with. And I don't know if we're going to be doing predictions, but I definitely think that we need to sort of put them at least in tiers. What tiers are the Nebraska Cornhuskers going to be in, or the Wisconsin Badgers and all that. So it's always fun to dive back in, see who's coming back, get a feel for what changes teams have made, to see if they are looking like they're going to get better, who they lost to graduation or transfer portal, that kind of thing. So you and I will come back. We'll look at the West next week. We'll look at the East the week after that, and holy cow, the season will be upon us before you know it.
Can't wait.
All right, Chip, where can people find you on the internet?
I can be found on Twitter at Chip Minnich. Last name is spelled Minnich. And besides podcasting with Michael for Buckeye Scoop, I'm an occasional contributor to Athlon Sports.
All right, I am on Twitter as well. Mike36fan, at Mike36fan is my Twitter handle. You can also find me at Buckeye Scoop on the day after every Buckeye game as the grumpy old Buckeye, giving you my thoughts on the things that happened in the game that made me throw things and shake my fist at the television and all that good stuff. And I think that you should probably go and check out all the other shows if you already aren't on the Buckeye Scoop Radio Network, even though it's really not radio, it's podcasts. But of course, you got the Buckeye Weekly, you get the Morning Scoop, you got the Sloopcast, you got Banks and the Give, you got all kinds of really good options there in the podcast world from Buckeye Scoop. We really have a lot of shows. It's just
something for everybody.
Yeah,
that's the best way to summarize it.
Yeah, something for everybody, and perhaps everything for you. But that'll do it for this episode of Silver Bullets Podcast. We'll be back next week to break down the West as best we can, Chip. And until then, the only thing there is left for us to do is say, go Bucks!
Go Bucks!